What if the only thing standing between you and your success is the fear you refuse to face? Could conquering that fear be the key to unlocking your true potential? Caleb Ross sat motionless at his desk. The glow of his laptop screen the only light in the room. Outside, the city moved on without him, rushing, chasing, living. But Caleb was trapped in a different world. A prison constructed not from steel bars, but from his own tangled thoughts. The projects he'd started, the ideas he'd dreamed up, all piled in his mind like unread books gathering dust, each one a promise made and silently broken. He scrolled through the list of tasks on his phone, a cruel reminder of everything he was supposed to do. A freelance project deadline passed 2 days ago. The message from the client sat unopened. The online course he wanted to launch remained an unfinished draft. His fingers hovered over the keyboard. But his thoughts tangled like a knotted rope, choking any spark of movement. "Why am I like this?" he whispered, voice barely audible in the silence. Fear, doubt, or just laziness dressed in a better name? Every day he told himself he was just being careful, but deep down he knew it was something darker. The voice inside him, sharp and unforgiving, whispered, "What if you fail? What if you embarrass yourself?" Caleb's apartment felt smaller with each passing hour, the walls pressing closer. The cheap coffee on the table had gone cold, and the evening sun was dipping behind skyscrapers, casting long shadows across the room. He leaned back and closed his eyes, trying to shut out the noise inside his head. But the echoes only grew louder, the laughter of friends he avoided, the pangs of regret for chances he let slip away. The growing void of ambition turned to ash. A sudden ping startled him, a calendar reminder flashing insistently on his screen. Meeting with potential investor today, 3 p.m. He swallowed hard. The truth was unavoidable now. The meeting was in less than an hour, but Caleb hadn't prepared. Worse, he didn't want to go. The fear wrapped itself tighter around his chest, squeezing out every ounce of courage. He imagined the room full of strangers, their eyes drilling into him, waiting for a confident pitch. His voice would tremble, the words would stumble, and the silence afterward would be unbearable. So he sat frozen, locked inside his mind's cold cage. Time slipped past, the minutes bleeding into one another like a slow-motion river. Caleb knew what was coming, the call that he'd bail. Another opportunity slipping through his fingers like smoke. The thought made his chest ache, a dull pain of self-betrayal. Suddenly the rain began, a soft tapping against the window, growing louder, a steady rhythm like a heartbeat. Caleb stood up and moved to the window, watching the wet streets shimmer under streetlights. The city didn't stop for his fears. Life rushed past, relentless and unforgiving. With a deep breath, he grabbed his coat and stepped outside, swallowed by the cool evening air and the downpour. The rain soaked through his jacket, but it didn't matter. Somewhere ahead, beyond the noise and his doubts, Caleb was searching, even if he didn't know what for yet. He wandered aimlessly through wet streets, the city lights blurry through the rain. That's when he noticed the small shop he'd never seen before, a dusty bookstore with a faded sign hanging crookedly. Echoes of Wisdom. Compelled by a strange impulse, Caleb pushed open the creaky door and stepped inside. The air smelled of old paper, dust, and forgotten stories. Rows of books towered around him, like silent sentinels guarding secrets. At the back of the store, an old man looked up from behind a cluttered counter, eyes sharp yet kind. "Lost in the storm?" the man asked softly. Caleb nodded, words caught somewhere between confession and question. "Sometimes," the old man said, "you don't need to outrun the storm. You just need to learn how to wait for the right moment to fly through it." That moment, small and quiet, was the first crack in Caleb's invisible cage. The first step toward a journey he didn't yet understand. The old man's eyes seemed to hold years of stories, as if the very walls of the bookstore whispered their secrets through him. Caleb lingered near the counter, feeling the heavy silence press in. Not uncomfortable, but expectant, like a pause before a long breath. "What's your name?" Caleb asked, surprising himself with the sudden need for connection. "Theo," the man replied simply, a faint smile tracing the corners of his lips. "And you are?" "Caleb." Theo nodded as if the name carried a weight he recognized. "Caleb, many people wander into my store lost, not just in the storm, but lost inside themselves. Sometimes the most dangerous prison is invisible. Caleb shuffled uneasily. That's exactly how I feel. Theo gestured to a worn armchair near a flickering lamp. Sit, tell me why the storm brought you here. Caleb hesitated but sank into the chair. The weight of the day, the deadlines missed, the fears swallowed, the silent betrayals to himself, rose like a tide inside him. I'm stuck, he confessed. I have ideas, things I want to do, but every time I try, something stops me. Fear, doubt, maybe. I don't know anymore. I feel like I'm watching my life from outside, waiting for myself to show up. Theo's gaze softened. Fear is a curious thing. It doesn't only protect, it imprisons. It convinces us that safety lies in stillness, but all it really does is cage the very thing it claims to guard. Caleb frowned. I'm careful, I'm not reckless. Isn't that smart? Smart? Theo chuckled, leaning back. Let me tell you a story. He reached under the counter and pulled out an old leather-bound book, its edges frayed and pages yellowed. Opening it carefully, he began to read. There was once a hawk born inside a golden cage, fed every day by a gentle hand. The cage was beautiful, warm and safe. The hawk knew how to fly by nature, but never dared to test its wings. The bars were unseen, but no less real. One day the door was left open, but the hawk did not move. It had forgotten its wings while waiting for permission to fly. Caleb stared at the old man, the story sinking deep. It's like me, he whispered, waiting, afraid to take even the smallest step. Theo nodded. The door has been open all along. Fear is the lock you made yourself. The wings? They've been inside you since the beginning. A silence fell between them. Outside, the rain softened to a drizzle, and the last light of evening faded. Caleb looked around the bookstore, the rows of ancient tomes like quiet witnesses. Somewhere between the parable and the gentle voice of the mentor, a shift began, a small flicker of something he hadn't felt in a long time. I want to fly, Caleb said, voice trembling with hope and fear tangled tight. And you will, Theo said simply. But first, you must face what's inside. The hawk doesn't fly because the cage is open. It flies because it remembers who it is. That moment marked the beginning, not of a sudden change, but a slow awakening. Caleb knew the journey ahead would be long and uncomfortable. But for the first time in years, the cage seemed less like a wall and more like a challenge. The next morning, sunlight spilled through Caleb's apartment window, but the light didn't chase away the shadows in his mind. The parable of the hawk and the cage circled relentlessly, like a haunting refrain he couldn't shake. He sat on the edge of his bed, fingers tracing the worn leather cover of an old notebook, a journal he hadn't touched in months. For years, Caleb had believed that safety was found in hesitation, in waiting for the right moment. Yet Theo's words echoed louder now. Fear is the lock you made yourself, Aid. The truth was brutal. Caleb's fear wasn't some distant enemy. It was a part of him, woven into his skin like a second pulse. And that fear wasn't just about failure. It was about what would happen if he succeeded, if he finally stretched his wings and took flight. What if success brought new pressures, new doubts? What if he disappointed those who believed in him, or worse, himself? He remembered the last time he almost spoke up in a meeting, when his voice caught in his throat, replaced by silence and a knot of regret. The moment replayed in slow motion, the way his heart had thundered, the sweat cold against his palms. That was fear disguised as caution, as wisdom. But it was really a thief stealing his chances. Caleb stood and paced, each step a battle against the weight inside him. His mind wandered to his father, stern, proud, a man who had built his life brick by brick. His father's voice, always steady and firm, echoed from memory. Don't be afraid of hard work, Caleb. Fear is the enemy disguised as a friend. It was strange to think that fear, once a silent passenger, had become the driver of his life. He wondered if his father had ever wrestled with his own shadows, or if strength came to him as naturally as breathing. His phone buzzed, a message from an old friend, Maya, checking in. She was different, bold, Fearless, some might say. Someone who chased her dreams with reckless abandon, who had once dared Caleb to do the same. He hesitated before replying, the words caught somewhere between shame and hope. "I'm trying," he typed slowly, "trying to remember how to fly." He found himself standing again by the window, the city stretched out like an endless labyrinth of possibilities and dangers. The sky was a pale blue, but clouds gathered on the horizon, a reminder that storms come and go, but the world remains. Caleb's mind drifted back to Theo's story, the hawk who forgot its wings. He felt a strange kinship with that trapped bird, a creature made for soaring, yet caged by its own fears. The question throbbed like a pulse. Could he remember? He closed his eyes and imagined spreading his arms wide, lifting into the sky. The wind beneath his wings was cold but alive. For a moment, he tasted freedom, a sharp, intoxicating breath. But the cage was real too, the invisible bars of doubt and self-reproach pressing down hard. That day, Caleb made a small promise to himself, not to wait for permission, to try, even if the wings tremble. And so he began. Not with grand leaps, but with tiny steps. An email drafted but not sent. A sketch of ideas on crumpled paper. A whispered voice in the dark saying, "You can do this." It wasn't progress yet. It was the start of a war, the battle between who he was and who he could be. The fight to unlock the cage, one shackle at a time. As dusk fell, Caleb felt a strange mixture of exhaustion and hope. The journey ahead was long, but the first spark had ignited. The hawk remembered it had wings. The days that followed were a battlefield, both outside and within. Caleb wrestled not with enemies of flesh and blood, but with the tempest raging inside his own mind. Every thought was a gust of wind threatening to knock him off balance. He tried to push forward, to move beyond the hesitation that had so long defined him. Yet each small attempt was met with an unrelenting storm, questions that stabbed deep, doubts that screamed louder than any encouragement. What if I fail? What if I'm not good enough? The words twisted and tangled in his chest like a tightening noose. Fear no longer hid in shadows. It was a roaring thunder, an endless downpour that soaked him to the bone. One evening, after a day where nothing seemed to go right, Caleb found himself back in the dim light of Theo's bookstore. The storm outside battered the windows, as if nature itself mirrored his turmoil. Theo looked up from behind the counter, his eyes calm and steady as the tempest raged around them. The storm you fear is inside you, Caleb. It is the war between who you are and who you want to become. Caleb nodded, exhausted. I thought I was ready. I thought I had the wings. But every time I try, the storm pushes me back. Theo leaned forward, voice low but firm. The storm will come, always. It is the price of growth. You cannot wait for the skies to clear before you fly. He paused, then reached for a small, smooth stone on the counter. Let me tell you another story. Caleb listened as Theo's words carved themselves into the silence. A young sailor stood at the edge of the sea, longing to cross the vast ocean. He feared the waves, the unknown, the storms that might swallow his small boat whole. An old mariner told him, "You will never reach new lands if you wait for calm waters. The storm is not your enemy, it is your guide. Learn to navigate through it, and the horizon will open before you." Caleb's mind churned. The metaphor was clear, but painful. To face the storm meant to embrace discomfort, uncertainty, and the raw edges of fear. It meant risking everything, not despite fear, but because of it. That night, Caleb lay awake, the storm in his mind a mirror of the rain against his window. He thought about all the times he had let fear dictate his choices, all the moments lost to hesitation and doubt. But he also thought about the moments of courage, however small, the briefest flickers of defiance against the dark. The storm was real, fierce and unforgiving, but so was the call to rise above it. Caleb understood now that mastery over fear was not the absence of it, but the decision to move forward anyway. With a deep breath, he rose and opened his journal. This time the words came flowing freely, fueled not by certainty, but by determination. He was not the hawk trapped inside the golden cage anymore. He was the sailor ready to steer through the tempest, chasing horizons that only courage could reveal. The storm within was far from over, but Caleb was beginning to dance with the chaos rather than cower beneath it. The morning air was crisp, and sunlight spilled like liquid gold across Caleb's worn wooden floor. He sat by the window, hands folded loosely on his knees, staring out at the horizon where sky and city met in quiet promise. The storm had passed, but its echoes lingered, a reminder etched deep into his bones. He wasn't naive enough to believe the battles were over. Fear still whispered in the quiet moments. Shadows danced at the edges of his vision. But now, something fundamental had shifted. Caleb's eyes traced the flight of a lone hawk cutting through the sky, wings outstretched with effortless grace. It was not trapped, not caged. It was free. He thought back to the journey, the moments of doubt, the parables, the battles fought beneath that fierce internal storm. And he knew that mastery wasn't about being fearless. It was about embracing fear as a companion, not a captor. His phone buzzed. Another message from Maya, asking how he was doing. This time, his reply came without hesitation. "I'm flying." The day ahead was not without challenge. A presentation awaited, nerves clawed at his throat, and the weight of expectations pressed heavy. But Caleb stood, took a breath, and walked toward his destiny with quiet resolve. The room was filled with faces, some skeptical, some curious. He felt the familiar tightness in his chest, but met it with calm. He spoke, not perfectly, not boldly, but truthfully. He shared his ideas, his vision, his flaws, and something remarkable happened. Connection. The room shifted, the skepticism softened, and a new possibility took root. Afterward, standing alone in the quiet corridor, Caleb smiled softly. The cage was gone, not because the fear vanished, but because he had risen above it. Theo's words echoed one last time. "The wings you seek have always been yours. You only had to remember how to use them." Caleb's story wasn't about winning or losing. It was about resilience, about redemption, about the courage to face the storm within and still choose to fly. He pulled out his journal and wrote a single line, a reminder for the days ahead. "Fear is the lock, but courage is the key. Unlock yourself and soar." And with that, Caleb stepped forward, into light, into life, into the freedom of his own wings. If Caleb's journey spoke to you, don't stop here. Take a moment to reflect on your own fears. What cages you? What wings you've forgotten you have? Click the next video to discover how embracing failure can become the greatest success story you'll ever tell. Your story is waiting to unfold, and every step you take is a victory over doubt. Remember, courage isn't the absence of fear, it's choosing to fly despite it. So rise, unlock your wings, and soar beyond what you ever thought possible. Subscribe now and join a community of warriors turning fear into freedom. Because your breakthrough is just one brave decision away. Remember, every step forward is a victory over fear. Keep flying. The wings you seek have always been yours. You only had to remember how to use them.